All right, we are live. Guys, welcome back to the Inner Self Rising podcast. As you all know, this is for free thinkers. We're focused on self-development and living authentically. Excuse me for my voice, guys, because it's probably going to sound really bad on the mic, but I'm coming down with the flu, unfortunately. And, as I say, this show must go on. So I am going to go through this like a soldier. But today I have an amazing guest today, someone I respect a lot, someone whose journey I really respect and admire. And so we have today Maxim, who is a philosopher, and we're going to be talking about an amazing book that's changed my life called The Fountainhead, by a philosopher named Ayn Rand. And so everyone please welcome Maxim.
Thanks, Miguel. Thanks for having me on.
Anytime, my brother, anytime. So can you just let my audience know a little bit about you and what you do?
Yep. I was born in Russia. I've lived in Melbourne most of my life. I completed a BA and Master of Bioethics at Monash University. I'm currently applying for PhDs in philosophy, and my career goal is to be a philosopher.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I'm always really impressed, man, by how young you are, but how much it seems like you've lived. You know a lot for someone. Well, I don't mean to sound patronizing when I say this. I really don't. I'm saying this in a like, I compare myself when I was your age, and dude, like worlds apart, man, worlds apart. So, you do. It's amazing. It's amazing. Anyway, we've got 1 hour, so let's basically get into it. So we're going to be talking about The Fountainhead, which is a book that you recommended I read, and so I ended up reading the novel. Yes. This was I think it was around September of last year. I think it was around that time. I read it, and look, the novel was like a page turner. It was a page turner. The characters were so compelling. We'll be talking about four main characters, but the characters were so compelling. Obviously Howard Roark, I absolutely fell in love with. I absolutely just, inspired by, and just it's weird because like I look for people like Howard Roark in real life. I look for people like him. There were other characters that I completely despised, that they just remind me. And like, so each character reminded me of someone that I've known in my life, people that I've come across in my life. And I'm very interested in characters, because all these kinds of characters, because they're good examples of, good, bad, virtue, and all that sort of stuff. So let's get into it. Do you want to kind of give the audience a little bit just what the novel's about? Just a brief summary of what the novel's about.
Yes, I will do it without giving any spoilers. So the novel is about an architect named Howard Roark, who was probably born around the year 1900. And it starts, I believe, in the year 1922 and ends in the 1940s. The book was actually published in 1943. So we follow Howard Roark through 2 decades of his life, from when he, starting from when he is, well, I suppose I'll spoil this because you find it out in the first chapter. He's kicked out of the Stanton Institute, the university where he's studying architecture, in his penultimate year. He's got only a year to go and he's kicked out. And it's a very interesting reason why he's kicked out. He's not kicked out for any kind of incompetence or bad behavior, but rather for daring to be independent. And this is really the theme of his entire life, that he wants to build his way. And we see him living in a world that doesn't appreciate that at all. And we see how he responds to that. And we also see other characters who take a very different attitude to life. For example, his contemporary Peter Keating, who is in the exact same life stage as him, We see how his career goes through those 2 decades. And then, as you mentioned, there are other characters such as Ellsworth Toohey, who is kind of the villain of the novel, and Gail Wynand, who is a very interesting character. And then, of course, there's Dominique Francon, the heroine of the novel, who is very mixed. We'll speak about her as well, I hope.
Yes.
But that's what the novel is about. It's about independence, and particularly intellectual independence, epistemically and also ethically. So being independent about how you think and being independent about the choices you make.
Yeah. Yeah. And Howard wants to become an architect, and he does it on his own terms, which I think is just so amazing. And Peter becomes an architect by conforming and by selling a soul. People sometimes often, I find the regular people like you and I, and people who aren't like celebrities often accuse celebrities of selling their souls, and yes, a lot of them do, but people often do that, say that in a way that if they were in that position, they would never do it.
Mm-hmm.
However, the average person's constantly selling their soul.
Yes.
Every day they're selling their soul, and they don't realize that connection. So people always say that, and I've thought about this quite a bit, and I realized, hold on, no, selling a soul is not, it's not about the amount of the money you're given in exchange for your soul. It's all the times that you forego your own values, that you trade your values for a friendship or a relationship or a job, or in a social setting, you let go of your values because it's the easier thing to do to get along with everyone else. You have to, and we always do this all the time. We're always selling our soul, and it's not this major. It's not just for the celebrities or for the politicians. It's every single one of us, I believe anyway. We have that challenge of every day. We have to choose our values. Every setting, we have to choose our values, and to not sell our soul, because we can all sell our soul on any scale.
Yes, exactly. We live in a very conformist culture, and that is quite typical, I think, of human societies. Now, there have been periods in history where things were better, where some degree of independence was actually encouraged. Probably the best eras in terms of intellectual independence and virtue in general, and egoism, which does not mean doing whatever you feel like whenever you feel like it. That's just stupidity and hedonism. Egoism means really taking your values dead seriously, like Howard Roark takes his values and deciding, this is what I want to do with my life, and this is how I'm going to achieve it. And I'm going to achieve it on my terms. He wants to build his buildings his way. That is what really is the core of egoism. And Ayn Rand proves in her philosophy that kind of principle is actually necessitated by the facts of reality. But we can set aside the philosophy, the sort of explicit philosophy, for the purposes of this discussion. Probably the best eras for virtue and intellectual independence were ancient Greece and the Renaissance and Enlightenment. Apart from those eras, mostly human history has seen us steeped in mysticism and a morality of altruism and self-sacrifice, which, well,
yes,
it's not surprising what that led to.
Yes. So Howard Roark is, Howard Roark represents authenticity, integrity, commitment to his own vision, values, and he's an individual at the end of the day. But he thinks for himself, and he's created his own destiny, and he's walking on that path. Whereas Peter Keating is the opposite.
Yes.
I was thinking, sometimes, all roads lead back to your childhood, but Peter Keating, so his mother was quite overbearing.
Yes, she was. She certainly was.
she definitely, like, obviously raised him, or influenced him to be to she didn't give him what he needed to feel full from within. She taught him that, at least how I kind of have assessed it, the desire for validation, external validation.
Yes.
And so,
And maybe we should just pause on that whole idea of external validation, because
yeah,
we really need to stress how toxic that is, how awful it really is to live life through other people. That's what Peter Keating does. So he has no idea what he actually wants in life. I think we get an indication that he wanted to be a painter, and he just
painter.
kind of gave it up and forgot the dream. And then he comes back to it decades later, and it's way too late for him to make a career of it. And at every crucial juncture in his life, he always chose social approval and validation from others over anything that he selfishly wanted. And so we often equate the quote unquote selfishness of Peter Keating, because he wants a beautiful wife, he wants all this money, he wants all this career prestige, and he gets all those things, and yet he's absolutely miserable because he knows he doesn't deserve any of it. And even the things that it represents, even the things that all those things represent to him, are just reminders of his own inadequacy. So he gets his career prestige, but it's at the firm of Francon, which you'll find out about in the novel. And he doesn't feel any pride about it. And he keeps thinking, if only I achieve these sort of intrinsic ends, these things that everybody thinks are supposed to make a person successful, if I just impress enough people, then I'm going to be happy and proud of everything. And all it does is just take his self-esteem down and down and down, and make him susceptible to the manipulation of the worst person in the novel, Ellsworth Toohey.
Yeah. So before we get to Ellsworth Toohey, like, this novel, like, meant so much to me because it related to my own life experience. So, as you know, I'm an ex-Muslim. And so I kind of felt like the Howard Roark in my own story, because what I grew up in, the kind of culture that I come from, it's about submission.
Yes.
Like, you're not an individual, you're an extension of the collective, and the collective worships this, God named Allah, and we all have to submit to Allah and his prophet. And as I was leaving Islam, I was met with all this like backlash, and even the ones I didn't expect to turn on me did, in all kinds of strange ways. So I had, like, for example, I had a friend, a good friend in the Muslim world, and he was he was gay himself, and so, but he wanted to conform. And so I remember all the major points in my life. So I always say the three major, like, pains of my life has been Islam, my mother, and coming to terms with my own sexuality. And in each, and this friend had a similar issues to me. And so at each turn, every moment that I sort of kind of confronted those three major pains in my life, he was there to kind of put me back there, and he wasn't necessarily a bad person. Like, he wasn't a bad person, but what he couldn't handle was the fact that I was facing my problems and he wasn't. And what he wanted me to do was to stay stagnant in where I was, because he was there and he couldn't get out. Therefore, I shouldn't. And so,
Mm-hmm.
and he's not an inherently bad person, but because of that mindset that he had, because of that weakness,
he was fearful. He was fearful.
Yeah.
And he was evading reality. That's the essence of all evil on the objectivist philosophy. All evil ultimately includes some degree of knowing something and pretending you don't know it.
Oh my God.
Now, anyone who thinks about religion, say Islam, any religion, would realize, wait, there's no basis on which to believe this. Like, what is the identity of this God? There's so many, ways you can approach the whole issue of God. But if you think about it independently, you will necessarily arrive at the conclusion that this just makes no sense. This is just made up. Somebody wrote this. And then to submit, and that is really the dissolution of yourself. And it's the spiritual suicide, in effect.
Man, that's exactly it. And so so I ended up becoming a reminder of the thing what he needs to do in his life. And I never told him to make choices about his own life. It's his life, and I really believe in autonomy and choice. You choose your life for you. But I inevitably became I became a reminder, and then he got resentful, and then he got bitter, and then the undermining started to happen, and tried to undermine my reality and what I was doing, and and all that sort of stuff. So Howard Roark, this novel was so powerful for me because it sort of it was validating for me in my own personal story. So let's get to Ellsworth Toohey. So he
Just a quick question before we go on to that. When you read the scenes where Keating keeps coming back to Roark asking him for advice, and Roark is sort of indifferent. He's happy to help with the building designs, but he doesn't understand why Peter Keating is seeking all this validation. Did you think of your conversations with your friend?
Yeah, because that exact thing would happen. So he would evade reality, right? He would evade it, and then like reality would just slap him across the face, and then they would come to me and ask for advice. Oh man, this is what's going on, blah blah. And I'd be like, dude, you know what it is. You know what you have to confront. Like I don't. You know, we have to confront. This is what you know. What you have to do. You know what the core of your issues are. I can't drag you out of that. I can't solve your life for you. And so it did remind me of that, because he would constantly come back, and then when I tell him, he would want me to validate his delusion. He would want me to validate him ignoring reality. But I always say I'm the kind of friend that if you want the truth, you come to me. If you don't want the truth, just don't tell me what it is.
That's really the only way you can be a true friend.
Yeah. But unfortunately, I've had to learn that a lot of people don't view it that way. And so when they're actually coming to you for advice, what they actually want is they want you to tell them what they want. They want you to tell them what they want to hear versus the actual reality. And I've learned the hard way when people have come to me. Oh no, Morgan, I want to hear, what do you think? I'm like, you're asking me. So I end up developing a rule. When you ask me, know that I'm going to tell you the truth. So don't play these games with me. If you don't want me to tell you what I actually think, don't ask me. But then I realized for certain characters who know the truth, but they don't want it, who know their reality, who know what they have to do, they're all constantly seeking the world to validate them ignoring their reality. And if you don't, you become a problem.
So there's actually a term for that in objectivism. It's a bit of a joke, that term. It's not really a serious part of the philosophy, but the term is social metaphysics. So it means you get your reality not by actually observing reality and trying to create concepts from that, but just by asking somebody else, what do you think? Or just trying to figure out whatever it's acceptable to believe. Yeah, so you're laughing because this is all very familiar to you, given the kind of upbringing you must have had. Yeah.
No, it's so familiar to me that it's just I can't even. It's just my life. It's what my life was. It's just Oh man, yeah. Anyway, let's get to Ellsworth Toohey.
Ellsworth Toohey.
So he's a wicked character. He's a wicked character. He virtue signals. Here's the thing. Like the thing I love about objectivism. Look, I don't identify as an objectivist, but the thing I love about objectivism is Ayn Rand's attack on altruism. Like I think that's so powerful. It really describes the evil of altruism. And look, I've yet to meet an altruistic individual who isn't a narcissist. I personally, on a personal note, I haven't come across anyone who has this almost cancerous desire to help that isn't a disastrous, evil individual.
I like that turn of phrase, a cancerous desire to help. Yes.
Yeah.
I know exactly what you mean. And then if you can manage just fine without their help, they resent you. Because they can't stand the sight of someone who can actually deal with reality. Yeah.
Right, right.
Because
And
that's the only means they can feel efficacious. They are not competent to deal with reality. And so, like, let's look at Ellsworth Toohey.
yes,
Ellsworth Toohey knows exactly what he is. This is what is so wicked about him. He in a sense, he's not evading. He seems really cognizant of, he knows the good. He knows that Howard Roark represents the kind of a virtuous world. He knows that a world full of Howard Roarks would have no place for him. It's not that they would do anything bad to him. He would just be completely ignored in a world of Howard Roarks. His words would have no effect on people in a world of Howard Roarks. And Howard Roark is completely immune to his rhetoric. There's a scene when Howard Roark basically observes this building that Ellsworth Toohey, that Roark had built in his own way, and then Ellsworth Toohey saw to it that it was defiled by a bunch of other architects who just added on little elements to completely ruin the artistic integrity of the design, and Roark had no ability to stop it. And Roark is just there kind of looking at what had happened to his building because he doesn't want to evade reality, right? Mm. And Toohey happens to be there, and he walks up to Howard Roark and he says, they'd never met before. And he says, Mr. Roark, of course, at this point, Ellsworth Toohey has been trying to ruin Roark's career for many years and often succeeded. And he says, Mr. Roark, we're alone here. Why don't you just tell me what you think about me in any words you wish? And Roark says, but I don't think about you. And Toohey is absolutely crushed. Any response would have satisfied Toohey except for that one, because he needs other people to provide him with a sense of efficacy. But anyway, why is Toohey so evil? I still struggle to understand at the kind of root cause of his evil. But ultimately, he's lived a life of choosing to advocate evil ideas and try to enslave people's minds to make them ripe for a collectivistic dictatorship.
Yes. I have so Ellsworth Toohey reminded me of, and I'm always going to relate back to my personal life, because this book just spoke to me on such a personal level that was just phenomenal. But Ellsworth reminded me of this girl that I grew up with. Okay, so she was quote unquote the perfect girl growing up, perfect daughter. She was really religious. She won the genetics lottery. She was really, really attractive. She's really beautiful. She was really intelligent, and she was really religious, and she was the good girl. So all the boys I grew up with wanted to marry her, because in my community there's no dating, there's just marriage. So that's the mindset. Anyway, and then in that process, she really got full of herself. She really bought into all these things that really were outside of her control, like her physical genetic lottery is outside of her control. Her intelligence, Anyway, so she bought into all of this. And in that process, because she was a standard of what it meant to be a perfect Muslim woman, what she ended up doing was she would bully all the women and boys who weren't Muslim enough, who weren't perfect enough growing up. So she would bully them the entire time. And then she'd hurt a lot of people in that process, really damaged a lot of people in that process. And then she got older, life started happening. She got married. Marriage wasn't perfect. Had all these kids. What Islam had promised her this perfect life if she had followed the rules. That she followed the rules and the result didn't happen. And so she ended up, she was in this catch-22. Do I admit that I was wrong all these years, the way that I behaved, right? I want to leave all this behind now. I want to change as a person, but in order for me to change, I have to reckon with what I did in the past. All those years of abusing people, I'd have to reckon with that. And she chose, you know what? No, that's too hard. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to continue on this path.
Yes.
And so,
yeah.
From my perspective, I think Ellsworth has lived his life in this way that in order for him to reckon with his life, he'd have to actually face all the evil that he did. And in my assessment, that's too much of a task. It's not worth it. It's not worth it.
He's completely too far gone. I mean, he's beyond help at this point. He's automatized lying and evasion, and lying not on any kind of detail, like, lying about what, whether about the reason you were late to work or something like that. I mean, lying about metaphysics, lying about reality. This is far, far worse. He's this kind of Hegelian socialist, like really lying at the deepest level anyone can possibly lie, saying that contradictions exist, this sort of thing. You can't come back from that. If he even began to try to reconcile reality with the evil he's committed, he would just commit suicide.
He would, because how would he face Howard Roark? How would he face Peter, Dominique?
Mm-hmm.
How would he face these people, and how look at them and say, yeah, I've ruined. Well, he didn't ruin Howard Roark's life, because Howard Roark, stuck to his values. But Peter, he saw Peter's weakness. And I actually wanted to ask you this, like, at no point, like I always think, because I'm sure you've come across people like Peter whose the desire is to just external validation.
I've seen one or two.
Yeah. Okay, so I just think in my head, I've known people like that, and he reminded me of one person in particular. This person will like do anything for validation, like anything. And I used to be friends with this individual. I used to like observe, and I used to be like, there's no introspection. At no point is this individual thinking, maybe I should just figure out what's going on and why I need external validation. Because I also think it's such a dishonorable, weak place to be. It's such you disadvantage yourself by seeking validation of the world, of it's actually not in your best
interest. Living it's worse than that. I don't think it's merely that you're disadvantaging yourself. I think you are really failing to live as a human being. Yeah. A human being must live independently. By independently, I mean primarily independently in their epistemology, independently in their ethics. They have to be prepared to stand alone on their judgment and to act accordingly.
Yeah.
And people who are afraid of thinking for themselves for whatever reason, and the fact that we have the current education system really doesn't help. It doesn't teach people to think independently at all. We're taught from a very young age that to find out whether something is true, you just have to ask how many scientists think it's true. I mean, there was a time when all the quote scientists thought the Earth was flat. The Earth didn't know that was the consensus among scientists at the time. So we're not taught objectivity. We're not taught actually looking at reality and then applying the method of reason logic to infer truths.
Yes, and we do live in a world of subjectivism, where everything's kind of subjective. There's my truth, Maxim, there's your truth.
Yeah, that's postmodernism. Yeah.
Yes, and it does my head in. It does my head in. I kind of see that like I see it as a form of evil, because evil people use subjectivism in this. They use it to their advantage, like Ellsworth Toohey. He is a subjectivist, and subjectivists for me are generally always collectivist. And he, Ellsworth would, from memory, he would, speak about how we should all kind of sacrifice ourselves for the greater good, which sounds lovely. But when I hear that, I'm hearing you need to forego yourself.
And it only sounds lovely because our current culture equates kindness and benevolence and treating people with respect and goodwill with sacrificing yourself to them. Those
Yes.
two things are actually opposites, in the same way that Peter Keating and Howard Roark are kind of opposites. Any concept of selfishness that puts Peter Keating and Howard Roark in the same category is an invalid concept. And unfortunately, the reason why so many people reject the term selfishness is because they come to equate it with someone like Peter Keating. Or if you take a real example, people would say, well, Donald Trump is selfish. You know, he's after power, he's after money, he wants to win. No rational person would do the things he's doing. None of what he's, quote, achieved is going to bring him any happiness at all. He's not interested in achieving values. He's interested in getting as much external validation as possible and crushing his enemies because he feels that they, wronged him by precluding him from the elite when he was younger.
And you realize how thin-skinned these people are who operate in that way. I mean, it's like that example you gave was perfect of Ellsworth, Toohey, and Howard Roark, when he asks him, "What do you think of me?" And then Howard like, "I don't."
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's actually the worst thing you could say to someone like that. That's actually, like, for a healthy, individual, that shouldn't be an issue. Like, if a person I don't really engage, or that I just an acquaintance or I see who tells me that they don't think of me, that should be normal. It should be normal that you don't think of me, because why would you be thinking of me?
And you shouldn't care that they don't think about you.
Yeah, but also, why should they think of you?
Yeah, exactly.
Why? But anyone that would take issue with that, to me, is a kind of sickness, in the way I see it. It's a kind of, evil sickness. Anyway, let's discuss Dominique, because she was interesting, because she respected, was obsessed with Howard Roark, but also wanted to bring him down because of her own mindset about what the world is going to do to someone like Howard Roark. So in her head, she thought, why not destroy him before the world destroys him? I just, I didn't understand that mindset. She was really irritating to me. She was really irritating to me, because I saw a kind of weakness in her that I was like, because you can't handle the world as yourself, you've created this philosophy in your mind about how the world is going to destroy this, so you might as well ruin yourself first. And that's how I saw it. It was like, let me ruin myself first before the world ruins me. That way I've somehow beat them to the punch. I don't know. What were your thoughts on Dominique?
Dominique Francon is a very interesting character. She seems to change the most throughout the novel. The four central male characters, Howard Roark, Peter Keating, Gail Wine, and Ellsworth Toohey, they basically just become more of what they already are. Right. Whereas Dominique fundamentally changes several times throughout the novel. Now, I will try not to ruin any parts of the plot, but what did I think of Dominique? She is operating on what we might call a malevolent universe premise. So she basically believes that the world is not a place where values can exist. But because she has a really positive aspect too, she loves values. She is a deep valuer. She really appreciates values. And Howard Roark to her represents the highest and the best that a man can be. And she doesn't see that anywhere else in her life. And so she concludes that from watching what happens to Howard Roark and all of the unnecessary struggles he goes through in his career because of other people's irrationality, other people's sort of psychological inertia, their lack of independence, their unwillingness to evaluate his work by their own standards and just defaulting to the standards of somebody else, which of course someone like Ellsworth Toohey just takes full advantage of. By observing this, she concludes that the world isn't good enough for Howard Roark. and that Howard Roark will inevitably be destroyed by such a world. So she doesn't want to be there to see it happen, but she doesn't commit suicide because she can't. She just is so in love with Howard Roark, and seeing what is possible to man, that for that sake alone, for at one point in the book, for that sake alone, she stays alive and pursues a course of self-debasement, in a way you can find out if you read the novel, to try to beat all the evil to the punch, in a sense. And for example, she despises Ellsworth Toohey. So what does she do? She works with him. She invites him for dinner. Instead of avoiding disvalues, she just decides, no, I have no choice about the fact that I'm going to have to deal with all this evil. I may as well do it on my terms. But the fundamental mistake she realizes that she's making, and that Howard Roark leads her to realize, is that you can still enjoy values in an imperfect world, in a world where most people don't have what Ayn Rand would call the psychoepistemology to identify rational values and to pursue rational values. You can still live a good life, presuming you have political freedom, because then nobody can physically stop you. Even if the spiritual culture is really oppressive and crushing, as long as your rights are, to the extent that your rights are respected, you can still pursue your own values, albeit it will be imperfect. And of course, you'll be opposed at every turn, but it will be better than any alternative. And that's what Roark leads her to realize.
Yeah. She just frustrated me, Like the book, I'd be like, why are you doing this? You know what you want. You value.
Oh, I get it. It's because she thinks that the evil is more powerful than the good. That's why.
I know, but I just think, okay, look, I just think if I'm in a situation where like it's just there's pure evil, and I'm in it and I'm struggling through it, and then I see light, I wouldn't try and dim that light. I'd just be like, oh my God, I hope that light makes it through. I really hope it makes it through. I wouldn't go out of my way to dim the light because there's just so much evil. It was hard for me to emphasize.
It's like imagine you're walking down the sidewalk and you see a little animal and it's really suffering and it's going to die. It seems like the most merciful thing to do is to just kill it quickly, right? That's how she approaches the issue with Roark. She at first tries to, I think at some point she tries to kind of break his spirit, to just lead him to conform. And then she thinks, well, if he conforms, he won't have a full soul, but that's okay because a full soul can't survive in this imperfect world. So we have to make him imperfect so that he can survive. But then she realizes that he's not going to break, and then tries to, she just can't reconcile that. She still believes that the world will destroy him for the longest time.
Yeah. It reminds me of I've seen mothers who's who've known some mothers who like love their children. I can see that they love their children and they want the best for their children, but because they're so scared of the world, end up imprisoning their children.
Yes.
The world is so evil out there. You don't know what it's like. You have to do X, Y, Z. And if it means that I sort of reject a part of you or reject you, then so be it. And so she kind of reminded me of that kind of mindset, which
One thing I'll add is that in Australia, I actually discussed this at the art event we were at recently, where I was reading poems. One thing I discussed with two of the attendees there is that in Australia, we have this very unhealthy thing called tall poppy syndrome, which for people in other countries, it's basically, I think it's in the UK as well. The idea is that if you stand out and you show that you're great in some respect, you'll get cut down. So what you need to do is preemptively downplay how special you are and how great you are, genuinely how successful you are in a tangible, provable way, because then you won't have to subject yourself to people who strive to cut you down. But we should just note that the people who want to cut down greatness are the enemies of civilization. Because it wasn't great. It was greatness that got us out of the cave and up to the skyscraper. It was not the people who were trying to cut it down. And the thing that stops us from going and colonizing all of space now is the people who are trying to cut down greatness. So, yeah, that's my rant.
That's exactly it. And you know, the first question, well, they sort of tell you in their own way, depending on the person, like, who do you think you are? You know,
yeah, exactly. And Roark said the right thing. You know, the dean in the first chapter or the second chapter, when he's getting kicked out of the Stanton Institute, he says when Roark announces that he'll just build the way he thinks he wants to build, the dean says, "But who's going to let you?"
Right.
And he says, "That's not the question. The question is, who's going to stop me?"
Right. Yes.
And another good line is, I don't build in order to have clients. I have clients in order to build.
Yeah.
So he's primarily driven by a passion for his work.
And so for those of you who maybe have missed it or or haven't been clear enough, Howard Roark is basically, he becomes an architect on his own terms. He gets kicked out of school, and he really does it on his own, using his own values, his own principles, his own way, you know, which sort of, you know, it kind of reminds me, well, you know, in the literary world in Melbourne, at least anyway, you know, it's for the most part, like, you have to really be a conformist. You have to kind of, like, as a poet, as a writer in the literary world, what's expected of me, like, particularly the kind of climate that we live in, you know, I have to write stories about how racist Australia is, and how horrible my life has been in Australia, and that's the kind of story that's expected of me to write.
As opposed to, where did you come from again?
I'm originally from Somalia, but you know, I grew up in
how terrible life is in Australia compared to Somalia.
right. But also I grew up
Russian, so I feel very much the same way about my country.
Yeah, well, there we go. And like, you were born here, right? You were born?
I was born in Russia.
Oh, you were born in Russia. So how old were you when you came to Australia?
I was 5.
5?
And I've visited 4 times since then. Yep.
Oh, wow. Oh, okay. Interesting.
Of course, visiting now is completely off the cards. I would be conscripted. And I don't want to fund a regime like that anyway. So
Right. Well, so when I came to Australia, I was 4 when I came here. And so, you know, I went through the education system here and all of that. But my struggles in Australia have had nothing to do with Australia, but everything to do with my culture and my upbringing. So the real struggles that I had everything to do with my cultural baggage. And so in the literary world, I'm not allowed to tell that story because it's an inconvenient story, because there's this major narrative that I'm supposed to kind of promote, which is, you know, Australia's a white supremacist country, and me being black, I'm oppressed in Australia. Not oppressed in my culture, because my culture, they have their other ways of knowing, right? So
there's multiple logics, multiple truths.
Yes. So, you know, my culture, and, you know, that's just a different way of living. It's not bad. It's just a different way of living. It's not harmful. It's just cultural. But in Australia, because it's the West, it's evil, and it's oppressed me. And that's the kind of stories that I'm meant to tell. Because that's not my story, and because I think that's just that story is false. You know, I ended up losing my publishing deal. I won't get published by most literary journals. I won't. But that's okay that's okay for me. That's completely okay, because I don't even want to be published by journals that promote that kind of that narrative, that's founded on so many lies, and it's produced so many liars and so many hypocritical individuals that I don't even want to be a part of that world in that way. That I want to do it my own way. You know, so again, this novel really, you know, connected with me on so many different levels. But let's talk about let's kind of define like concepts here. Like for you, what's the difference between, like, for example, bravery and courage?
Oh, I would use those terms interchangeably.
You would, yeah,
I can define them. I mean, I think I usually say courage. Courage is it's effectively the virtue of acting on your convictions in spite of fear.
Yes, I agree. Yeah. I absolutely agree with that, because when I thought of it, because in my life there are times where I've been brave, there are times where I've been courageous, and upon reflecting on it, you know, in your youth, when you're young, there's a kind of you naturally have a kind of bravery about you, but that bravery sometimes it doesn't come with knowledge.
Yes, so it's unwise. Like, you want to do the virtuous thing, but Aristotle had a term for this, phronesis. So practical wisdom, and there are two ways that phronesis can kind of go off the rails, like that you can lack phronesis and that you can go off the rails for those reasons. So you can kind of miss the mark at the penultimate moment, and there's one other one, but I actually discussed this in my in one of the interviews on my podcast with Justin Oakley. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Cool. Oh, yeah. So you're also a podcaster. So I'll link your podcast in the.
Thank you.
At the bottom for sure. And at the end, I'll get you to kind of talk a little bit about your podcast at the end. But yeah, man. So I just so even in my own life, like I realized the kind of difference, because as I've gotten older, you know, you get, if you're thinking and if you're actually on this journey, or if you're actually reflecting on your life and your decisions and why you are at where you're at and all that sort of stuff, you gain a little bit of knowledge and, you know, a little bit of wisdom here and there. And so I realized, upon reflecting on my past, that there are moments in my past life where I was brave, but I didn't necessarily know what I was getting myself into, but I was brave, and I didn't have that knowledge. But now I'm more aware of my decisions. I'm more aware of the consequences of my decisions. But having said that, my vision is still the same. My vision is still the same. So I understand, for example, like I understand the life that I want to lead will necessarily lead me to making certain people not happy. I won't make them happy. Right, which will create, because I want to live a life where I say what I mean and I mean what I say. That's gonna ruffle the feathers of the Tooheys of the world, and there are lots of them. So I understand that's a part of the. It comes with the territory, unfortunately, because the world we live in, it comes with the territory. So what do you do? And also for me, courage doesn't negate fear. You can still have fear, but you move through that fear regardless.
Yes. In fact, if there's no fear, it doesn't count as courage, right? Yeah. If you know something is right to do, and it's also what everybody expects you to do just by coincidence, and you do it, and you're not afraid to do it for any reason, you do it, that's not an issue of courage. You might have acted correctly, but that's not a courageous act. Courage would refer to cases where you know what the right thing to do is, and there's some reason to feel fear, but you conclude rationally that, no, this still needs to be done, and you act accordingly. And you're right. I think young people tend to really admire courage, even if they don't fully know what the right thing to do in a particular case is, not because they're not sincerely trying, but just because they lack wisdom or knowledge or experience. And so in effect, they lack what Aristotle called phronesis. And that is something that comes with age, if you are committed to reason. If you're not committed to reason, you will just gradually descend into cowardice as you age, or into kind of a stupid recklessness where you think you're being courageous, but you're just making a mess of things. Yeah.
Yes. That's absolutely right. Coming back so I actually wanted to know, want to know this about you, and feel free, by the way, to answer or not answer. It's up to you. You know, you can. But what's led you on this like, why are you interested in things like this, authenticity, integrity? Because again, I keep coming back to you being young, and I don't want to sound patronizing. I really don't.
No, it's fine.
But you're really young and you're on this journey. Like, I know what's led me to this journey, right? A lot of people listening to this episode know, kind of have an understanding of my story and what's led me on this journey, right? So for me, it was like a life, almost like a life or death in a way, in a intellectual soul way. Like it was either me or I'd become a shell of myself, and I wouldn't be a human being. So I chose me. But for you, I'm really curious to know what has got you on this journey, or what sparked it.
Yeah.
Because you could be doing anything. You could be doing You could be doing anything. You could be partying. You could be.
Yeah, I could be a bureaucrat. Yeah.
You could be doing. You could be doing anything that a 22, an early 20-year-old has the freedom and the realm to do, but you've chose not to. I'm really interested in that.
I do party on occasion, so but it doesn't conflict with my career aspirations.
Yeah. Okay. I meant the average, their life.
I know what you meant. Okay, let's see. So firstly, I should say I really admire your courage, because for you to come to the conclusion that you should live for yourself and be intellectually independent is far harder, given the kind of upbringing you had. It requires a really active exercise of free will across a long time, and a hell of a lot of courage. And it's harder for someone like you, raised in such a totalitarian, collectivistic culture, than for like a Western person who is not raised under those conditions. Nonetheless, sort of the average Western person still grows up taught a bunch of really false and evil ideas. Yes. So, okay, now why? What led me down this path? There's a certain irreducible aspect to the answer, because I chose it. If you keep inquiring why, there's no infinite regress. There is just volition. It was the choice to. It was many choices, of course, over decades of my life. I'm 23 now, and I realized recently, upon reflection, that I've actually been interested in philosophy since I was 4 years old. I didn't know the word philosophy when I was 4. I didn't realize that all the questions I was asking about knowledge and about ethics were about knowledge and ethics, or that they belonged to the same study. But I was constantly asking why. Like, why does this person believe this? What proof do they have for that? And the goal was not skepticism. It was not to disprove that knowledge is possible. It was actually to ask, how is this knowledge possible? And how do I know that they've got it right? Can they prove it? And so there was a kind of fundamental commitment to objectivity from the start. Then, of course, before I discovered objectivism, I dabbled in philosophies which, on reflection, I realize are not correct, but they would have had certain aspects that, taken in isolation, are correct. For example, what's a good example? Well, I was interested in Plato, I was interested in Aristotle, I read a little bit of Nietzsche. And early on in her life, Ayn Rand also admired Nietzsche, but then, he has this whole theory of the Übermensch and some people being naturally better than others, and basically denies the role of volition, and thinks of people as masters and slaves. And of course, any rational person would have to just lose Nietzsche completely. But he did say one really great quote that Ayn Rand thought to put into the Fountainhead, but omitted it because she didn't want to come across as endorsing Nietzsche as a philosopher. And the quote was, "The noble soul has reverence for itself." And she refers to this in the foreword to the Fountainhead. So I was interested in ideas since as early as I was really conscious. It's not as early as I can remember. And then I discovered objectivism when I was 17, and I did not accept it dogmatically at all. It took me years to gradually accept parts of it, and then to realize that they conflicted with other knowledge I thought I had, and to iron out the contradictions, and reject Christianity, which I wasn't really into, but which I sort of tried to believe in, but I couldn't. And then I realized that's actually a virtue, because I'm incapable of going by faith, or rather I refuse to. So yeah, that's kind of my intellectual background.
Yeah, wow. So just because you're Gen Z, so how do you, because me being an older millennial, like I'm one of the older millennials, but when I look at Gen Z, sometimes I feel like parenting Gen Zs. I feel like just like every generation in their youth, they're lost. So how do you navigate? How do you engage your own generation when you meet like your average?
Well, I am very selective in who I engage with at all generations. I actually have friends ranging from people in their 20s to people in their, I don't know, 60s. So broad range of friends across different age groups. People are not determined by their age any more than they're determined by any other factor that they don't choose. People are determined, well, people aren't determined at all. They determine what will happen based on their choices.
Yes. But do you feel like you're a part of your generation?
It's within their control. Sorry?
So do you feel like you're a part of your generation? Like, do you feel like?
Do you mean, am I intellectually on board with the ideas that that most people, statistically speaking, of my generation agree with? What do you think? Obviously not.
But because I always used to say that I was born in the wrong generation, that I should have been born in a later generation. Because I always felt like my generation, we're just not on the same path. There are ideas that I have that just not in line with the my generation. So I was curious to know if you feel like that now, because like I feel like for your generation, I think for your generation, ideas of virtue is just seen as just old and weird and just
What I think you're touching on is not so much unique to my generation, but it is really pronounced in this period of history, just today. What's going on today is a rejection of any kind of serious ideas, a rejection of principles, a rejection of objectivity, truth. Any kind of claim to absolute truth, to things as they are, is deemed oppressive. We even hear that science is oppressive because it asserts that there are objective truths. So, I mean, reality is not oppressive. Reality is what it is, and you just have a choice of whether you accept it or not. There's that, and in fact, the case is rather the opposite, but that's harder to explain. In the sense that if you reject reality, then you will be oppressed politically. But that connection is a little bit. It will take longer to go into.
Yeah, but just I don't know if you found a way to make people understand that actually align.
Yeah. Sorry. So you reminded me. We were talking about kind of principles in philosophy, and I was saying that we live in an era where people deny the importance of philosophy. Now, this is not unique at all to our era. This goes back to ancient Greece, but there they actually took philosophy seriously. So because they disagreed with Socrates and they thought he was an influential philosopher, they had him executed. These days, a philosopher just gets ignored or cancelled. Right? So ignored if people consider ideas unimportant. one example that illustrates this well is people tend to get really riled up about concrete political issues. Oh, who did you vote for in this election? In Australia, it really makes no difference who you voted for. They're all the same. But they are completely indifferent to differences at a really deep philosophical level, because they don't realize that these are not just academic disputes. For example, the question of whether there is one world or two, whether we should be rational or not, these questions are far more influential on history than the outcome of, the last, say, Australian election. But I think people don't realize how those abstractions relate to reality. And what they also don't realize is that the rejection of principles is itself a philosophical position. So there's no way to get outside of the requirement to hold some worldview. Everybody holds a worldview. Everybody holds some basic ethical beliefs, epistemological beliefs. There's nobody out there who acts as if literally any action is as good as any other. If they did that, they would die very quickly.
I was gonna say, what would you say to an individual, or to an individual that wants to go on this path, that wants to be authentic, wants to live in their own authenticity, and they really value like integrity, being transparent, being honest, all that sort of all that good stuff, but they have a fundamental flaw in their understanding when it comes to things like, reality is what it is. Let's say they view that as something that's just harsh. Like that's a harsh thing to say to someone. Reality is, well, what do you mean reality? This person just got beat up and you're saying reality is what it is. So like, what would you say to someone to make them understand that actually reality is, aligning yourself with reality is good for you?
I'm really glad you brought up that question, because it's been something I've thought about recently, is how prevalent the just flat denial of an objective reality is. This is not something you would necessarily expect, 250 years after the Enlightenment, that we would be, that most people would not take really seriously the idea that there is one absolute objective reality. And yet most people don't. Those who do tend to be determinists, so they deny that human volition plays a role in this reality. So in the example you gave, where you see a person get beat up and then somebody says to you, well, that's just reality. There's a sense in which that's true and a sense in which it's false. It's true that, as a matter of fact, that person did get beat up, and that is now a fact of reality. But it denies the fact that somebody chose to administer the beating, and they could have chosen otherwise. That is, that they chose that way is, of course, a fact of reality now that it's happened, but they didn't have to choose that way. They could have treated that person with a respect for their rights, right? So it's important to include volition in your view of reality, because it is part of reality. Because if not everything that's caused is determined. So you can have causes, but you can also have self-caused actions where your choices enter into the causal chain. And actually, I have a friend doing her PhD on this subject. So she could probably explain this far better than I can, and maybe I'll interview her, hopefully. But that's important to realize, is the identity of consciousness and the role of volition.
Yeah, interesting.
As for why people reject reality, there's all sorts of reasons. None of them are, of course, rational. But ultimately, it comes down to there's some convenient belief of theirs that they prioritize above a perception of reality, or above concepts to do with reality. And if they believe there was one objective reality, well, what does that imply? If there's one objective reality, there's only one thing. There's only one way things actually are. Yeah. Which means there's only one correct theory to explain all that, which means every other theory is wrong, and everyone who believes all the other theories is wrong. Well, in a world where we try to, quote, respect everyone's opinion at the expense of reality, that is not going to go down well.
Yeah. And I just I would For me, like, there's no other way to explain that other than, if you're that person that got beat up, for me, it would be like, well, in order for you to, you don't, these people that beat you up have already harmed you. Don't harm yourself. Don't harm yourself by being a victim. That's what I would say. So that did happen to you, and it was terrible. It shouldn't have happened, but it did, and now you have to get up. And you can't let them determine how the rest of your day or life is going to go. That's what I try and tell people, like, aligning yourself with reality is actually really good for you, because it's a powerful tool to help you overcome your life situations. And at the end of the day, no one's gonna save you. That's just not a part of reality. And also, what I've learned is that life is just it's a trade-off. Like, nothing is for free in life, everything's a trade-off. So what are you going to trade? Are you going to give your soul to them? Are you going to fold and bend and then let that be your story? Or are you going to acknowledge what happened to you? So it's not about denying what happened to you. You acknowledge everything that's happened to you, but you're going to let that determine who you are, what you are, where your life goes. I think the
This
beautiful.
this reminds me of the poem Invictus, which you will have heard me read.
Yes, yes, yes,
So
yes, yes,
that's
yes,
right.
yes.
It's about a person who refuses to be broken by circumstances, who is the master of their fate and the captain of their soul, and that's the essence of volition. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, and that's really what this novel for me is fundamentally about. And it's to persevere. It's not easy. Life is not easy. One of the other things that I've learned is life is not easy, but it's simple. And so,
In a way, I get what you mean. Yeah.
yeah, so you just it's not easy. So you get up and you persevere and you stand up and you take one, even if it takes you, just put one foot in front of the other, do that. you know and so, but if I'm aligning yourself with reality, sometimes may hurt. It may hurt to realize, oh shit, I've been making all these decisions in my life that are not good for me, and I have to face up to it. And these were the consequences of the choices that I make. But if you weather that storm, at the end of it, it's much better. Mm-hmm. Say you've hurt someone in the process, right? You were the kind of person that, like, evaded reality where it was really evil, but you denied reality, and as a consequence, it affected the people around you. Let's say that was the case. If you're looking for a way out of it, the way to do it is to look yourself in the mirror, to acknowledge what you did, to acknowledge all the ways that you evaded reality, orient yourself back to the truth, and then walk in that. If it means you have to reach out to the people that you hurt and apologize and actually acknowledge what you actually did, then so be it. Then you do that. Mm-hmm. And that's how you move on, and that's how you overcome. Yeah, and you got to you got to forego that ego in that way, that thing that made you,
it's just fear. It's just fear.
Yeah. And it may hurt, and it probably will hurt, but you have to persevere through it. You have to persevere through it, and there is a light at the end of the tunnel. There is.
I'm not saying it's easy at all. That's why most people don't do it. But you should. The thing to remember is that every day you don't do that, you are not really living. You're not living in the full sense a human being needs to live. And you're just undercutting everything you do. There's no point to your life, really, if you're just evading it all the time. And there's no point to your life in those few moments that you do evade, if you are evading occasionally, as most people do.
Right.
And yeah, if you like to demonstrate some of the themes and the quality of the writing without spoiling the plot, I selected a scene which I could read. It's a standalone scene, so it really it makes sense on its own. So in this scene, Howard Roark, the architect, has just built a new project in the country. And a young boy who is ambitious, who wants to write music, but he hasn't seen a concretized ideal of the kind of ideals he finds in, say, Tchaikovsky or Rachmaninoff in the world. And he wants to see this. And now he sees it for the first time, and he meets Howard Roark. And this is the scene. So the boy is on a bicycle, he stops, he sees Howard Roark there. After a long time, he glanced about him, and then he saw he was not alone. Some steps away from him, a man sat on a boulder looking down at the valley. The man seemed absorbed in the sight and had not heard his approach. The man was tall and gaunt and had orange hair. He walked straight to the man, who turned his eyes on him. The eyes were grey and calm. The boy knew suddenly that they felt the same thing, and he could speak as he would not speak to a stranger anywhere else. "That isn't real, is it?" the boy asked, pointing down. "Why, yes, it is now," the man answered. "It's not a movie set or a trick of some kind? No, it's a summer resort. It's just been completed. It will be opened in a few weeks." "Who built it?" "I did." "What's your name?" "Howard Roark." "Thank you," said the boy. He knew that the steady eyes looking at him understood everything these two words had to cover. Howard Roark inclined his head in acknowledgement. Wheeling his bicycle by his side, the boy took the narrow path down the slope of the hill to the valley and the houses below. Roark looked after him. He had never seen the boy before and would never see him again. He did not know that he had just given someone the courage to face a lifetime.
Man. Yeah.
And that is the courage that I think the Fountainhead gave me. And I'm glad it had a similar effect on you.
It has, man. It has, so much so that, like I was saying to you, I want Howard Roark to be a figure on my my podcast. When I want to talk, I want to use him as a reference. To people that are listening, be like Howard Roark. Not like Peter. And so it's an amazing novel. I really recommend everyone to read the novel. Please read the novel, The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand. Check out her philosophy. It's a really interesting and powerful philosophy. Really highly recommend it. So before we go, Maxim, can you please tell people what your podcast is about?
Yes, so my podcast is relatively new. I only started about 2 years ago. I started by posting some videos on the history of philosophy based on a course I taught in 2023. And recently I started interviewing people. So you'll find interviews with a couple professors on there. And also I recently interviewed Nicholas Khrushchev, who is a really brilliant philosopher of aesthetics and musician. So highly recommend that as well. You'll also find my poetry event readings there. And if you are interested in poetry, if you don't mind, Magan, I'll just pitch my product quickly.
Go for it.
I created this booklet. It's been professionally printed, The Greatest Poems of All Time. A selection of the world's best poetry curated by me. There's Percy Shelley in Song to the Men of England, imploring the feudal serfs of England to rise up against their feudal oppressors. And here is, these are Tennyson's Marinas from the poem Ulysses. And you'll find a collection of 42 poems in that. It's available for purchase on my website for $35 Australian, including delivery in Australia. Thank you.
I'll put all your details in the description box, your website, podcast, and all that sort of stuff. And yes, please buy the book if you can, because I've got the book, and I'll tell you this, the title of the collection actually matches the poem. So they are great poems, so I highly recommend it. And yeah, Maxim, thank you so much, man, for joining, for being a guest today, man. I really appreciate it. I absolutely love this conversation. I'll definitely want to have you on again, if you
Absolutely. I very much enjoyed this conversation too. Thank you for asking such good questions and for discussing this wonderful book with me, Magan.
Anytime, brother. You have a good rest of the day. And to the outliers, remember, live your one life. You have to live your one life. All right.
That's right. Bye-bye.
Bye. Let me end the stream.